So welcome to the reunion banquet of the Underground Railroad, 30 years past. And I think it's pretty rare to be able to go back and look at 30 years of architecture and systems and experience and understand what worked and what didn't and what happened. And I guess from my perspective, and everybody has their own perspective, but 30 years ago in June, I sat down with a Coffee Dan's restaurant in Loma Linda, California with George Timpson, and I laid out an idea for an architecture which has become the onion diagram of a concentric circle of software. The inner circle is the MUMPS language, and you work your way out. And excuse me, that architecture basically has thrived for 30 years now, and grown. And it started out as a seed that blossomed, and away you go. So looking back at that is quite a rare experience to understand what really worked. And to me, it was a philosophical exercise in many ways. And I don't know if I can really do it justice in a short time. But several of the points that struck out, or struck with me, were the role of mailman, electronic mail system, to get people to talk to each other. And when I came to the VA, the psychiatrists didn't want to talk to the psychologists. Birmingham didn't want to talk to LA, well, according to Washington. VA didn't want to talk to DOD. And you had all these hierarchical stovepipe structures that didn't want to connect. And how do you connect them? So two of the things that I saw there were, one was a common data dictionary. So having a data dictionary, having a layer of communications that we could talk to each other, and it was kind of the default structure. You know, by default, you were sharing the same information. It wasn't a separate integration exercise. If you were part of the system, you had access to the common patient data dictionary. And I still remember publishing that book. I don't know what happened to it, with Schaefer, and about a 100-page manual, roadmap to the VA. I haven't forgotten the title of it. But that data dictionary, I think, was very critical. And I spent a lot of time in the early days figuring out how best to do the data dictionary. The other part was the lateral connections, the ability to connect and communicate across the stovepipes. And that was really the goal of Mailman. And personally, I think, looking back at it, it was a kind of a white-hot creative experience. I remember doing it very intensively. And I think Marty mentioned the St. Patrick's Day in San Francisco. And frankly, Bruce Beebe was a programmer at the San Francisco who didn't come with us that night in San Francisco. And he ended up committing suicide shortly thereafter. And he was a close friend of mine. And I had quite a guilt complex about it, that I wasn't treating him as a good enough friend. And I think that part of my personal motivation for Mailman was to overcome this failure to communicate. And part of the energy that I felt in making Mailman work was kind of atonement for lack of communication. And I think that energy of communicating and building that lateral communication and allowing people to communicate. Later I learned that about 25% of the activity of DHCP and CHCS and RPMS systems were just email. People wanted to communicate. Forum was another message there. So I think that one of the key lessons learned, I think, that was people want to communicate, they need to communicate, and there's a great value in giving them communication independent of specific requirements. And Mailman blossomed into many, many different directions that I had no idea that it would do. People passed their shift notes from one to another. There was all these informal organizational issues. The informal structure of the organization was supported through Mailman that I had no idea would happen. So when I left the VA in '86 and went to SAIC, we had the CHCS requirements, 9,600 requirements, some of which were back to punch cards, images and such. About 1/10% were related to email. But it turns out that 25% of the value of the system was email. So that there is this 25% gap between what the value was to what the specifications were. And that's what I learned about DoD. And I had a little bit of a run-in with DoD this morning. And fortunately, I'm not employed by a defense contractor, and I can shout to the Assistant Secretary of Defense and tell him that he's wrong. But I think that the DoD model of predefined specifications, saying this is what we expect, versus the evolutionary model that came out of the VA of starting simple and letting it evolve, is very dramatic. I've built VA-DoD interfaces 3 times now in my career, and all of them have been ignored. From 1978, Rob has the meeting notes. We had the design and the intention of having a VA-DoD IHS government-wide hospital information system. It was in the cards. We, at that meeting, also designed a Y2K compatible date format. It wasn't a strange thing that the year 2000 was going to happen. We had the vision that there would be a year 2000. It was a great visionary viewpoint. But it wasn't difficult to build a Y2K compatible system if you just had a little bit of foresight. And so we did that, and we had this sense of creating a path of least resistance to where we wanted to go. It was easier to do the Y2K compatible routine. It wasn't somebody had to hammer it, and I never had any authority within the VA. In fact, I was demoted for my activities within the VA. So I don't know if you've met other civil servants that have been demoted, but I did DHCP work, so I got demoted for it. But the model, though, is that creating this path of least resistance, we didn't have authority, we didn't have control, we had a better idea and a vision that had to attract people. So in this sense, we had an attractor network rather than a promoter network. And we had to attract people, and the people who were attracted to it had this energy and this shared values, and that's where the system came from. So I think one of the lessons learned was the value of lateral communications, and I think that we've seen that with email. I don't think that we've fully seen what an email system could be if it were more mailman-like. The mailman system has not really manifested itself on the web yet, as far as I'm concerned. And in that sense, you don't have the sense of a controllable community, I'll call it an ensemble, of people who are communicating about a topic. And in mailman, you say you start a thread, you start a message, and you're starting a conversation. So it's a conversational flow rather than a transactional interaction. And in the lesson I learned from that is this notion of the difference between transformations and transactions. And a transaction is kind of what happens when you put your ATM card in the machine and you get money back. It's wonderfully precise. You have very controlled understanding of the amount in and the amount out. There's no confusion, there's no ambiguity about that transaction, and you can go anywhere in the world and do your ATM machine transactions, which is wonderful. I'm glad we can do that. Healthcare doesn't work that way. If somebody gives you a lobotomy, a tonsillectomy, and a shot of penicillin, you can't say that you had 100% of your health care that month. You can't just add up everything that people do to you and say, well, that's what healthcare is. In fact, the things that aren't done to you or you don't need to have done to you are probably the most important things. So the idea of just adding up all the transactions in healthcare and assuming that's what the sum of those things is your healthcare is utterly fallacious. And it's assuming that patients are these toaster-like things, that all that you do is add up the pieces and you have the whole. Healthcare is a transformational process. It's an ongoing thing, and there's irreversible processes. If you do a tonsillectomy, you can't put the tonsils back in. So this notion of transformation and the ensemble, the group of people or the entities, the objects, the information fulfilling that transformation, that's not part of our healthcare system. We've transactionalized it. We've turned it into an industry that does transactions against the system does to the patient. And the new paradigm is, well, we're going to empower our consumers so, you know, they can buy services more efficiently from the producers. And there's this model of the healthcare system as this factory. It's like a Toyota plant that produces Priuses at the other end. So we produce, I hesitate to even call them healthy patients, but there's this production line model that it's this transactional thing. Well, you're here, you have this disease, we'll produce this at the other end. And that's just fundamentally wrong. And there's just, based on our accounting system, this transactional approach. And I left the healthcare industry, I'll call it that for now, in the mid-90s. Rob has, for the last 10 years, been trying to drag me back into it, and I still have my doubts. But I felt that we were undergoing this train wreck, and it was just kind of a slow-moving train wreck. And if I did anything to make it more efficient, it would just hit the wall harder. And so I went into philanthropy and other variations of do-gooderness, if you will. But one of the things that I did do before I left was get involved in the personal health record. Wrote a lot of papers for Rob and the kind of advanced technology ideas, and Dan, we were involved in that also. And it turns out that this personal health record is re-emerging as a hot topic, so I'm kind of re-engaging in this. And coming back to healthcare after all these years, a couple of things that I've learned was that there's a big difference between good intentions and good incentives. There's a lot of people with good intentions in the world, but coordinating those things with good incentives is a challenge. And I don't see that happening in today's system. So I kind of look at today's healthcare system as a disease industrial complex. And we're all about disease. It's all about transactions in the disease. And the pharmas are looking for diseases. They're looking for drugs. And they really want this lifetime chronic drug that they can feed you for $3,000 a year to fix your problem. They're not looking for health. They're not looking for making you a healthier person. Maybe walking on the beach every week is a good thing instead of taking an antidepressant. They don't want to have you walking on the beach. The travel industry might like that. But, so the health-inducing things are not getting the attention. They're not getting the fitness that the disease-inducing activities are. So if I were to carry forward the Underground Railroad to a new world, which I am announcing tonight, the Underground Railroad rides again, and the question is, where are we going? What's the bad guys? ODM&T, I think, is gone. And turns out that the disease industrial complex is here. So, and I think that the solution is to keep this spirit and this energy alive, but at a broader scale. And it's not just the VA, it's not just MUMPS or COBOL or the centralists, but it's the industry that thrives off disease. And there are very, very few people who are thriving off of health. And so some specific activities that I will be pursuing is one called the Language of Health Initiative. What does it mean to be healthy? Martin Seligman at University of Pennsylvania started a group called Positive Psychology, an initiative called Positive Psychology. And he said, what does it mean to be a healthy, thriving person, and as opposed to not having the DSM-4 criteria, whatever they might be. So DSM was originally a derivative of what's called the Manual of the Insanities. I said, well, what about a Manual of the Sanities? What are the positive things that make life worth living? So that became positive psychology. He wrote a book called Authentic Happiness. It's the #1 course at Harvard undergraduate school now. The whole science of happiness is more than just feel-goodism, but what are the positive life-affirming things that happen that make people resilient and life-affirming and make life worth living? And that's different than depression and chronic whatever. It's not to say that people don't have diseases, but having a positive value from which to look at the disease is an entirely different perspective. So if your primary emotion is fear of cockroaches, you see cockroaches or not, and that's your thought-action repertoire is cockroachism. If you're walking on the beach at sunset with a lover and you have these great oceanic feelings and life is good, and you see a cockroach, you can still deal with cockroaches. So you can still drop down from this great oceanic feeling to cockroach thinking if you need to. If you'd rather concentrate on the sunset, you can go back to the sunset. But the lesson from positive psychology is that you have this thought-action repertoire that gets bigger as you move up the positive scales. So systematically building this positive level and then dropping down to the disease level, if you will, is far greater than just sitting there at the disease level and fighting cockroaches. So I think we need to systematically explore that on a broader scale, particularly genomics. And today the people who are researching genomics, my daughter is one of them, you're not rewarded for finding the health gene, the resilience gene, the adaptability gene, the recovery gene. You're rewarded for finding the irritable bowel syndrome gene that you can put somebody in forever and ever and get $3,000 a year. So we're rewarding people to find the disease, the cockroaches, not the walking on the beach at sunset. So I'm calling this positive genomics, and this is one of my personal goals that I'm working on. I was talking to Zach Kahani at Harvard Medical School just 2 days ago, and we're going to have some kind of a workshop at Harvard Medical School, and Pete Solovitz from MIT, we're working with him. What is the language of health? How do you even describe this? What does the adaptation gene look like? Is there such a thing? Do we have a language for that? There's no financial reward for that, but it's probably the most valuable thing that we can do to our health. So that's one of the things that I'm working on, and that's what I kind of pledged there. The other thing I think I learned from my time with the Underground Railroad is the value of people working together and pulling together people at their energy levels, the energy we saw here tonight. This is not a unique group. I mean, everybody has this kind of energy. What is unique is the ability that we had to pull together, and we had a common foundation standing on each other's shoulders. But the energy in this room is not, you know, you could pull people off the street and pull them in and they'd have that kind of energy, but they wouldn't have any place to put it. And the question is, how do you build this standing on shoulders model to pull people together? And I think we've seen this on the internet, eBay, the social networks and things like that. There's incredible powers of community that are appearing. And frankly, the historical model, if you look at what worked in the internet and what grew, Tim Berners-Lee, when he invented the internet, did not go to the United Nations and ask permission to create the World Wide Web. He didn't go to Barnes & Noble and say, could we please create a bookseller, Amazon.com. He didn't go to Sotheby's, say, can we create eBay? He created this mess of URLs and websites that out of which eBay, Wikipedia, Amazon emerged. So he created a space for good things to happen in. And I think that's what we need to do today for healthcare. We need to create the space within which the healthy things will thrive and evolve and replicate. And it's probably not going to come from the the powers that be. Encyclopedia Britannica is not going to invent Wikipedia. Sotheby's is not going to create eBay. Barnes & Noble is not going to create Amazon. It's going to be the garage shop operators. It's going to be the people way out on the fringe that have this innovation that will then grow it. So rather than looking at the powers that be and the big players and the people who are thriving in the perversely incentivized healthcare system, we need to look at the innovative people. So I'm going to finish my lecture at that point and then move on to Rob. And Rob is an old friend of mine and one of the... long-time friend. He's a... Dan, do you have your award, your plaque? Can we show that?
Sure.
Is it around there someplace? Could somebody hand me that?
That one's big enough to see, right?
Yeah. So one of the things that surprised me in the Underground Railroad was the value of going to my arts department and saying, can you create a thing that can photocopy for the banquet tomorrow night? And so we have this thing called the Certificate of Outstanding Engineering Achievement on the Underground Railroad. And I remember passing these out to people. And it was kind of like an Academy Award. I was just flabbergasted at the emotional content of this and how people would lobby for this for 3 months in advance. Oh, so-and-so needs one of these things. And, you know, I mean, this is just something I photocopied on the way to Scamsey or whatever. And the value of the symbol of this was so powerful, and the endurance of this was so great. So it's a very simple recognition of great power, basically. So this is Dan Maloney's outstanding. I'm not sure what Dan did to deserve this, but I'm sure he did. And I unfortunately didn't keep track of who all got these, but I would have liked to have seen it. But I think this is a great symbol, and the fact that he has this, I think Nancy has one also. So we can pass this around for Dan's thing.